Hello. I'm Tim Sellers. I'm the director of the Center for International and Comparative Law here at the University of Baltimore School of Law. And I want to welcome you all to our 17th annual Stead Lecture on International and Comparative Law. The Stead Lecture is the high point of our academic calendar, and I always look forward to it with great enthusiasm. And again, this year we have a wonderful speaker. Before we start, I want just briefly to welcome our new dean, Ron Weish. This is the first Stead lecture he's attended. And like the rest of you, he will be attending, at least briefly, the reception after the talk, so you'll have an opportunity to welcome him to the University of Baltimore. We're very glad to have you here, Ron. We're also very lucky to have as our speaker Scott Shane. Scott Shane is a reporter at the Washington Bureau of the New York Times, where he covers national security. He's written extensively about targeted killing under the Obama administration and the debate over torture in the Bush administration, and his 2007 articles on interrogation, which he wrote with several colleagues, were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize. From 1983 until 2004, Mr. Shane was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun, so, like many of you, I've known and admired his work for many years. Tonight, Mr. Shane will talk about drones, kill lists, and American values. Mr. Shane will speak for about 30 minutes, and then he will take your questions, and then he will drink with you at our reception. Mr. Shane, the podium is yours.
I just got a University of Baltimore Law School tie, a treasured possession. So I have to keep track of it here. Can folks hear me okay? I want to thank Tim and Ron and the school for having me here. It's a great honor to speak to you tonight and to be able to address this very important and extremely contentious topic. It's nice to be inside here instead of out on the streets wandering around looking for a parking space. I commute to Washington most days on the MARC train, and I look for street parking, so I spend a lot of time wandering around out there looking for spaces. So if anyone has any really good ideas, approach me afterwards, please. I should also say that, as some of you may have noticed, apparently David Petraeus was doing more than overseeing drone strikes as the CIA director, and perhaps we can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A. I'll try to leave plenty of time for questions about the really perplexing legal, moral, and practical questions raised by targeted killing. But I'll race through some of what I know about this phenomenon, and I think but I think a lot of it is so debatable that it would be great to have your questions and your thoughts on this stuff. I want to begin with a couple of very short videos, if I can make them work. But just to sort of frame the question, this targeted killing of suspected terrorists, if you had said that phrase in this country, 13 years ago, people would have been sort of shocked. Even in the year 2000, the official, in actually early 2001, the State Department spokesman said, when Israel killed a couple of terrorists with targeted killing, we condemn targeted killing, we don't believe in it, and so on. And now it's been institutionalized under two presidents, a Republican and a Democrat, and it's all happened without any debate by Congress because of what I would consider a sort of bogus secrecy that surrounds it. But it's very much with us and seemingly here to stay. So let me start here by by giving you just two, I guess you could say, opposing views on video. Let me see if that works. Okay, and so this is President Obama on what they called an online hangout in January. I think it was January 30th of this year. His first time he really spoke openly about the drone strikes. Oops. Here.
The question comes from Evan in Brooklyn, New York. Let's watch.
Mr. President, since you took office, you ordered more drone attacks in your first year than your predecessor did in his entire term. These drone attacks couple off civilian casualties. I'm curious to know how you feel they help the nation and whether you think they're worth it.
Well, Steve, I can't hear you right now.
I'm sorry, there you go. I want to explain the reference to the New York Times just because the story today focused on the use of drones in Iraq, actually. So.
Well, you know, that story, I think, was a little overwritten.
This is a little press criticism from the president, but he'll get to the point.
There's some surveillance to make sure that our embassy compound is protected. As a general proposition, the question that was posed, I want to make sure that people understand actually drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. For the most part, they have been very precise, precision strikes against al-Qaeda and their affiliates. And we are very careful in terms of how it's been applied. So I think that there's this perception somehow that we're just sending in a whole bunch of strikes willy-nilly. This is a targeted, focused effort at people who are on a list of active terrorists who are trying to go in and harm Americans, hit American facilities, American bases, and so on. It is important for everybody to understand that this thing is kept on a very tight leash. It's not a bunch of folks in a room somewhere just making decisions. And it is also part and parcel of our overall authority when it comes to battling al-Qaeda.
Okay. So let me give you an alternate view. This one is from this sort of video that was made, a short documentary that was made to accompany a recent report by folks from Stanford and NYU Law School that was very critical of the drone strikes. The report is called Living Under Drones, and I'll just play a little bit of it. It gives you a sample of what it is like to be on the receiving end of these strikes. Sorry. I mean, he's a professor at Stanford.
Cordoned off and into which virtually no one can enter. We were able to speak to people from that area who came out to other parts of Pakistan and to interview with us.
Okay, you can put the lights back up, please. So there's, that sort of frames it. The president says it's very precise, and the critics say it kills a lot of civilians, a lot of innocent people, and it's very much the opposite of precise. Let me just see if I can figure out how to turn off that screen. If the tech person can get the screen turned off, that'd be great. I won't need it anymore. Let let me first talk about the origins of these strikes. They really were devised in the year 2000 when there were Predator drones that were just for surveillance. They had cameras on them, and they would broadcast back to intelligence officers on the ground, views of who was beneath the drone. And drone floated over Tarnak farms in Afghanistan where Osama bin Laden was, and they saw bin Laden. And the CIA folks who were watching this said, this is 2000, it's before 9/11, but it was after the 1998 East African Embassy bombings. They said, can we get some cruise missiles here? And they found it would take 4 to 6 hours to get cruise missiles there. And by then, of course, they had no idea whether bin Laden would be in the same place, whether perhaps innocents would be in that place. And so they began to think, well, what if we, instead of just having this drone for surveillance, what if we actually put missiles on the drones? They started working on it. And by November 2002, the CIA had tried its first such strike out in the desert in Yemen, blew up a car, killed a terrorist, a wanted terrorist, and there happened to be a Yemeni American in the car with him who was also associated with al-Qaeda but was not the intended target. So the first strike killed an American citizen, among others. That was the beginning. Now, as you can imagine, as you know, it's been really expanded and institutionalized by the count of a website called the Long War Journal, which keeps close track of these strikes. They count 319 strikes in Pakistan, killing about 2,500 people. They say that, according to press reports, about 150 were innocent civilians. Some estimates of the innocent civilian deaths in Pakistan go as high as 800. The count of strikes in Yemen is about 55, killing about 350 people, perhaps about 80 of those civilians. And there have been a number of strikes in Somalia as well. There's talk about perhaps moving into Mali, where jihadists have sort of taken over a large part of the country. And you get the feeling that this isn't going to stop anytime soon. Let me talk a little bit about how it works. There are two parallel bureaucratic systems, one run by the CIA and one run by the military, to create these so-called kill lists. What they really are kill or capture lists. It's essentially an authorization to say that this guy's a bad guy, we have evidence that he's a terrorist, that he's a threat to the United States, and so you have authorization to kill him or capture him. The fact is that in the 4 years of the Obama administration, there's only been one guy captured. There have been people captured in other countries with U.S. help and imprisoned in other countries, but only one person has been taken into American custody. He was held on a ship for 70 days, and then he was taken into the federal criminal system. Everybody else has been killed. So it's really a bit misleading. Although the administration would say it prefers to capture people, they say it's impossible to do it in the tribal areas of Pakistan and Yemen, where most of this takes place. We know a little more about the Defense Department's system than the CIA system, which is very much sort of in-house. The Defense Department operates with a large video teleconference, sometimes with as many as 100 people online from different agencies. And somebody presents a case against someone using what someone referred to as baseball cards. It's essentially a description, a bio of the person, a description of what terrorist acts they allegedly have committed, where they are, who they are, what the evidence, what the case is against them. People sometimes push back, say, how do you know this? What's the source on this? So there's this big video conference that takes place, between a bunch of agencies. Then the CIA also produces its own nominees. They all go up to the White House. They go to the National Security Council. And John Brennan, CIA veteran who became in 2009 Obama's counterterrorism advisor, is sort of the point man. He takes these things in, and the president himself has insisted on having a sort of central role here, which is kind of shocking when you think about it. The president of the United States sitting down to decide whether to essentially approve the execution of someone in another country. It's highly unusual. It sounds kind of ghoulish. His aides say that he does it because he feels it's an immense responsibility, and that frankly, he doesn't entirely trust the folks at CIA and DOD to make the decisions by themselves. He makes all the decisions. We were told for a story that ran in May, he makes all the decisions on strikes outside Pakistan, which are both military and CIA strikes, mostly in Yemen. And he insists on signing off on strikes that are especially risky, have a relatively high risk of civilian casualties, or are a very high-level target in Pakistan. And at least until May, we were told he had signed off on about a third of the strikes in Pakistan. So that's what happens. But there's also a kind of mission creep here as with everything the government does, it seems. And so the CIA created something called a signature strike. A signature strike is where you don't have the name of the person on the ground, but you have a certain signature, meaning you see a bunch of guys in open vehicles with weapons. They're in an area of known militants. They're headed maybe for the Afghan border. So they can get approval for these signature strikes. The signature strikes have been by far the most controversial. State Department has often protested them, pointing out that in areas like in Yemen and in Pakistan's tribal areas, many males carry guns routinely, and that it's sometimes very difficult to distinguish a militant on the way to an attack from a bunch of guys on their way to dinner. And so those have been by far the most controversial strikes. There was a big strike in March of 2011 that killed several dozen men. One version is they were militants at a meeting. The other version is it was sort of a loya jirga, sort of a meeting of guys over a mining dispute. It's very difficult to get to ground truth in situations like that. An important question about all this is it legal? There are people out in the audience, I think, who could answer that question much better than I could. But I'll give you a sort of amateur version. Both under Bush and Obama, the U.S. government has taken the position that we are at war with al-Qaeda and its allies. And they'll tell you, and they've told me, as in any war, U.S. security officials say they try to kill the enemy. They follow the laws of war, having to do with mostly avoiding civilian casualties and that kind of thing. The Obama administration points to the authorization for the use of military force that Congress passed after 9/11, still, all these years later, as the legal foundation for this program. But it also, as sort of a backup thing, talks about the right under international law of a country to self-defense. If someone's about to attack the U.S., we're allowed to try to take action against them under international law. The problem is that many countries, including some of our European allies, do not accept our notion of a global war on terrorism, where we can go into Yemen, where we're not at war, for example, and pick people off. Michael Hayden, the former CIA director who oversaw this program for a while, said that he doesn't think any country except Israel totally buys our legal reasoning. And Hayden does buy it. He supports this program. He ran it, but he says that we have very little support out there in the world for this view that we take. And certainly, there's a huge ongoing debate, as I mentioned, about the true extent of civilian casualties. Who's a civilian, for that matter, in a situation like this? Is someone who sweeps up at a compound of al-Qaeda militants, with them, or is that a civilian? If someone delivers food to a compound filled with terrorists, is he part of the problem, or is he an innocent civilian? And it's a sign of the highly disputed nature of all this that the United Nations recently announced that it's setting up a unit in Geneva with the express purpose of investigating targeted killing by the United States. The legal question, of course, is particularly acute when the target is an American citizen. You probably recall Anwar al-Awlaki, this Yemeni-American cleric who worked at a number of mosques in this country, spent about half of his 40 years in this country, was born here, so he was a U.S. citizen. He was gradually radicalized after 9/11, ended up joining the affiliate of al-Qaeda in Yemen, which is called al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And he was an extremely effective online propagandist, at least 24 terrorism cases in the West. The investigators turned up his sermons, his messages, his writings as an influence on young Muslim men who he was telling to join the jihad against America. And he had a Facebook page that was very active, a lot of Facebook fans, very much a kind of cyber age terrorist. But he was mostly a propagandist, and then he went operational and participated in training and preparing that young Nigerian man who tried to blow up the plane over Detroit on Christmas Day in 2009, the so-called underwear bomber. And the CIA said that it had very good evidence that he was directly involved in that. It turned out later that the Nigerian man who survived, of course, said, Anwar al-Awlaki, he met me and talked to me and told me what to do. So al-Awlaki went on the kill list after that, and as you may recall, a little more than a year ago, he was killed in a drone strike in Yemen, along with another American citizen who happened to be there, who also was working for al-Qaeda, named Samir Khan. I suspect that for those who know Anwar al-Awlaki's track record, and Samir Khan's track record as a propagandist, although I don't think he was really an operational guy. A lot of Americans would say they were not terribly sorry that these guys died. But if you pose the question a different way, if I say, should the President of the United States be allowed to designate for execution any American citizen he believes, based on secret intelligence, is a dangerous terrorist, what would you say to that? I mean, that's a pretty arresting proposition. But somewhere in the bowels of the Justice Department, there's a lengthy, something like 50-page legal opinion that says the President of the United States does indeed have that power. More tragic, certainly, than the death of Anwar al-Awlaki was something that happened shortly after that, which was there was another strike in Yemen, and it killed Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, who by nobody's account was a terrorist. He was living in Sana'a, the capital, with his family. He kind of disappeared one day, left a note that said, I'm going to look for my father. And he kind of went out into the desert, into these wild areas, looking for his father, and was hit with a drone strike and killed. A 16-year-old kid, an American citizen. He was born here. And the official explanation, there is no official public explanation, but when you try to talk to sources, the claim is that they were aiming at somebody else, and that Anwar al-Awlaki's son was essentially collateral damage. But that kind of thing, where a civilian, someone who's not a terrorist, is killed by these drone strikes, is a core part of this problem. The U.S. government claims that the drones have a tiny rate of accidental killing. They point out that the drones can hover over an area for hours or even for days. The video quality is said to be extremely good. They can watch people come and go. There's obviously no pilots. There's no danger to the pilot. And they watch patterns of life, as they call it, and they decide who's a militant, who's not. And they also supplement that with eavesdropping on cell phone conversations. They have informants on the ground, and they put that all together, and they say the number of people accidentally killed is relatively tiny. One estimate that was given to me by somebody who worked on the program was that about 50 of the first 2,000 people killed in Pakistan were believed to be, innocent civilians. But many critics of this program, Pakistani and American and Yemeni, do not believe these claims. They don't believe the CIA can even know with the degree of precision that it claims who it's killing. The problem, one thing that mixes this situation up a great deal is that both the militants and Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence agency, are known to make false claims of deaths from drones. Indeed, some American intelligence folks have told me that the ISI sometimes carries out extrajudicial executions, leaves the bodies by the side of the road, and then leaks word that these people were killed in a drone strike. So it's very difficult to sort out and very dangerous territory to go into. To give you a quick example, there's a 16-year-old named Tariq Khan who was allegedly killed with his 12-year-old cousin in a car by a drone strike in Pakistan. And this happened a few days after Tariq Khan, the 16-year-old, had been in Islamabad, the capital, at an anti-drone conference, a kind of international conference against the drones. And this is a kid who grew up in the tribal area, and he was eager to stop the drones, and he volunteered to try to document the strikes and so on. And people were very impressed with him. And a few days later, he was dead, supposedly in a drone strike. Well, I have not been able to get to the bottom of that, but I have been told by U.S. officials who have watched the video of the strike in which he supposedly died that no one anywhere near that age was in that car or died in that strike. However, his family and others say that he and his cousin are dead. So it's very difficult to get to the bottom of this. And part of the reason it's difficult to get to the bottom of this is what I referred to earlier as bogus secrecy. What I mean by bogus secrecy is that it's no secret that things are blowing up on the ground, that people are being killed by these missiles. It's no secret that the drones are flying overhead. It's no secret that the United States is the one that's running this program and taking these shots. So why is the program secret? It's really no longer justified. Initially, it was to give Pakistani authorities some measure of plausible deniability, but that's gone too. Everybody knows that the U.S. is doing this. But the CIA's program there remains a covert action, one of the most secret, well, the most secret category of operation in American intelligence. So it's very difficult to sort out, and a kind of stark example of that is you have Obama, as we saw, going on YouTube and saying, yeah, we have drones in Pakistan and they're very precise and so on. Well, at the same time, the Justice Department has taken the position in court in a Freedom of Information lawsuit filed by the New York Times. I'm one of the plaintiffs, and a parallel lawsuit filed by the ACLU, that it cannot confirm or deny the existence of any such program in Pakistan. That's the legal position of the government. And we're not seeking to find out where the next drone strike is going to be, or anything very sensitive. All we're seeking is the legal opinions that the government has prepared to justify this program, which we know exist. And they're withholding it, and that's the position they've taken. The worst part of this secrecy is that our elected representatives in Congress have never had a public debate about this program. Why? Because it's secret. They're not allowed to talk about it. So you have a bizarre situation. I've been in sessions like this or a panel discussion where three of us are outsiders and one is a member of Congress, or and say another is from one of the intelligence agencies. The outsiders, we can talk all day long about drones and targeted killing. The other two just have to clam up. So it's a very strange situation. We've embarked on this program without a public debate in Congress. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to wrap up. But let me mention that the problem of drone proliferation, or the phenomenon of drone proliferation. More and more countries, not surprisingly, are beginning to develop this technology or buy it from others. The vast majority of drones are for surveillance purposes. They're being used for all kinds of purposes, and they will be used for many more. Of the 7,500 or so drones that the U.S. has now, only I don't know, probably a few score, probably 100 maybe at most, are armed at any time. The armed ones are a tiny minority. But there are armed drones now in Russia, in China, in Israel, in Turkey. As far as I know, the only strikes have been taken by the U.S. and Israel so far. But here's the interesting question, which is undoubtedly going to come up. When the Russians hit a Chechen terrorist who's, say, hiding in Georgia, in the Republic of Georgia, with a missile from a drone, what are we going to say at the next day's State Department press briefing? What are we going to say? What's our position? If the Chinese go after a Uyghur Muslim they consider to be a terrorist who's hiding in Kazakhstan, and these people, this all is real, this exists, what is our reaction going to be? In other words, we're setting a pretty unusual precedent, an example for the rest of the world, and, we're doing it, again, without any debate in Congress and probably with too little debate out in the public. To conclude, I can make a strong case against drones, that they're illegal, that they kill lots of civilians, that they create such anger that they recruit more terrorists than they kill, and that they're setting a dangerous examples for other countries. I can make a strong case for drones, that they could prevent the next 9/11, that they're legal under domestic international law, that whatever the exact numbers, they're the most precise weapon in the history of warfare, and that they cost the lives of far, far fewer civilians, I think this is really indisputable, than either traditional airstrikes from a manned aircraft or ground invasion. Fortunately, I'm just a reporter, and all I have to do is try to dig up the facts and not come to any kind of final conclusion about who is right in this debate. That's up to the rest of you. So thanks a lot for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Among those who know, who is more willing to say something than some of the others who know things about this topic. I will call on people in the audience if they have questions, so that Mr. Shane can concentrate on his answers and not on his question. Yes.
Scott, is it true that Osama bin Laden formally declared war on the United States and told his followers to kill Americans wherever they found them?
Yes, Osama bin Laden in 1998 issued a declaration of war against the U.S. and he had by then recruited this Egyptian group into al-Qaeda, so there was this kind of common front of terrorist groups declaring war on the U.S.
Are we formally at war then?
Yes, that's what, I mean, we have not declared war. I mean, Tim could probably answer this better than I could, but we have not declared war. Congress never declared war in the traditional conventional war sense, but they did pass shortly after 9/11 this authorization for the use of military force against those responsible for 9/11, which means al-Qaeda and its allies, and that's the sort of legal basis that we're still operating on. Well, we working in Pakistan and Yemen is extremely difficult. There was a period of time where in Pakistan, our basically, I mean, one of our Pakistani, ethnic Pakistani or Pakistani citizen reporters, who's very good, did a lot of work in the tribal areas, was informed that he should leave the country to avoid being killed, and and even our bureau chief there had a lot of threats and eventually left. And you get it from the militants, you get it from the government. It's a very dangerous place. Yemen is not that different. Yemen, as you know, overthrew its longtime leader, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and now has the former vice president, guy named Hadi, in power. But al-Qaeda, during all the kind of uproar of the Arab Spring, seized a lot of territory, and there's still a kind of ongoing civil war there. So, and as a gringo, so to speak, as an American, to travel into the tribal areas of either of those countries is, basically too dangerous to do. You would think, why don't we just go there, talk to the people who saw these strikes, figure out for ourselves what the civilian casualty rate is. It's almost impossible to do that. Yeah, I mean, what you say is certainly true to some degree. But to take the United States as an example, the U.S. had a bunch of attempts at assassination back in the 50s and 60s. We sent a poisoned handkerchief to an Iraqi leader who we thought was leaning too communist. He didn't blow his nose, apparently, and he survived. We sent poisoned toothpaste to the Congo to do away with Patrice Lumumba, a leftist leader there. The CIA station chief, who I actually interviewed before he died not long ago, thought it was a crackpot scheme and threw the toothpaste into the Congo River. And Patrice Lumumba was killed by others. And in fact, when all these scandals came out, as you recall, in the mid-'70s in the Church Committee, the Senate's Church Committee, President Ford reacted by issuing an executive order banning political assassination. And we have actually tried to stay away from it. And I forgot to mention Castro. We talked about poisoning his diving suit, having exploding cigars. There were all kinds of schemes. And as last time I checked, Castro was still with us. So we haven't had a lot of success historically with assassination, and there's been real concern about political assassination that an American president who probably operates and travels more openly than most leaders would be more vulnerable to a sort of legitimization of political assassination that arose in the world. So the analogy they're using here is war. They're saying this is a war. They're not saying this is assassination, and you either buy it or you don't.
Why do you think al-Qaeda has such a vendetta against America, unlike other Western powers, like in Europe?
Well, I think al-Qaeda does have a vendetta, as you put it, against other Western powers. I mean, as you probably recall, what the British call 7/7, the way we call it 9/11. Was an attempt to, well, not a successful attempt to set off a bunch of bombs in the subway. There was there have been a number of other successful attacks and a whole lot more plots broken up in Britain, in Scandinavia, even in Germany. So we're far from the only target, but we're the biggest target. And I think that's a combination of things. It's partly being the kind of big bully on the block. We're a big target. We have the most, biggest military, the most aggressive military deployed around the world, and so on. And a lot of people would say that's our foreign policy. We support Israel, which is obviously not terribly popular in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, and we for a long time supported dictators in the Arab world. We supported Mubarak in Egypt. We still support the Saudi monarchy, obviously. So all those things put together, I think, has made the U.S. a big target for al-Qaeda.
Just an observation, I was thinking while you were talking about an earlier question, that back in the time of World War II, when in fact nations were
Yeah.
We burned Cologne and Essen and
Yeah.
had an atomic bomb strikes in Japan and so forth. And then in my more recent years of my lifetime, I've seen the concept of collateral damage arise.
Yeah.
And this change also in the way that we don't have so much nations fighting nations, but we have groups.
Yeah, those are both very interesting points. Hank Crumpton is a CIA veteran who was deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center at CIA in 2000. He was the one who told me that story about how they watched bin Laden walking around and said, "Hey, why don't we put missiles on these drones?" And he said, you know, he defends this program in exactly those terms. He compares it to the firebombing of Dresden. And he says it's actually a great thing and a mark of sort of human progress that we are even arguing about, you know, killing handfuls and dozens and scores of civilians when before we were burning entire cities or dropping atomic bombs on entire cities. That's his point of view. And you know, and I think it's legitimate to the extent that there is, you know, indisputably a huge difference between, you know, sort of zapping individuals or small groups of people from a drone with these small Hellfire missiles versus just, you know, saturation bombing as we did in Vietnam, you know, let alone World War II. Well, you know, it's you know, I on the web I found some Chinese marketing presentations for a big, like, international weapons show, and they actually had a kind of mock-up video showing one Chinese drone signaling another Chinese drone. The first one just surveillance, the second one armed. And then you see the second drone fire. It's all animated, but you see it fire down onto a ship which military folks tell me, you know, bears close resemblance to a U.S. aircraft carrier. So they're actually marketing these things. There's some mystery as to whether it's a situation where, and they're marketing them to other countries, in other words, whether it's a situation whether they actually have them up and ready to go, or whether if they get a big order, they'll start working on them. But the technology is not terribly sophisticated. And just as you have, you know, sort of knockoffs of the iPod or the iPhone, you know, I mean, this is only a matter of time.
I was wondering, in your discussion about the public debate and getting the public debate to happen on this issue and who can talk about it and who can't, hasn't, for example, Harold Coe from the State Department spoken openly about drone strikes and the legal justification for drone strikes and how it's changed from the Bush administration justification? So I guess what I'm asking is, are there some agencies of the U.S. government that are more willing to talk about this than others?
Yes.
And is there a consistent message from every direction?
That's a great question. I should have mentioned that. But the Obama administration, Obama came into office, and on his first day in office, he said he was going to run the most transparent administration in American history. And some of us who are in the reporting business would argue with whether he's achieved that. But that is a stated value of this administration. And so they felt clearly very awkward about the situation that I've described. And they've sent, like, I think we're probably up to about half a dozen people out to give public speeches about usually the legal background. It's not usually about anything operational, but it's about the legal background for the most part of these strikes. So Harold Coe, the legal advisor at the State Department, was the first to do it. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, has given such speeches. John Brennan, the President's counterterrorism advisor, has given a couple of them. Stephen Preston, the General Counsel of CIA, gave one. So it's not fair to say that they've been completely, you know, secretive about what they're up to. But the strange, we operate in this strange netherworld now that's neither open nor secret. So, for example, on the morning when word spread that Anwar al-Awlaki had been killed in Yemen, obviously big news, it was all over the news, I was writing a story, everybody was writing a story. The president had to appear at a retirement ceremony at Fort Myer in Virginia. So when he first came out and took the microphone, he said, first, I have something to say. As I recall, he said, Anwar al-Awlaki is dead. And I want to thank the brave men and women of the military and the intelligence community. But he didn't say, so he walked right up to the line of saying, we killed him, but he didn't quite get there, and that's sort of where we are now in this business. The legal speeches that you talk about, avoid certain words. It's what they think they're withholding from the public is anyone's guess. But as I said, they give these speeches about the law, but they won't release the legal opinions, the formal legal opinions that the strikes are based on. And what's particularly galling to those of us in the press is that we all remember, because we wrote about, in April of 2009, a few months into Obama's presidency, over the objections of, I think, 6 former CIA directors, Obama ordered the release of the legal memos on CIA interrogation, the brutal interrogations the CIA conducted under President Bush in the first years after 9/11. Those were secret legal memos, too, exactly parallel to this, mostly written by the Office of Legal Counsel at Justice. And so Obama took a lot of heat from the intelligence community to release Bush's memos, but for some reason he doesn't want to release his own.
We're approaching the end. Oh, I have another question.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about whether these things are effective in terms of achieving their military goal. I mean, does targeted assassination actually work, or do there just many more people to fill these voids?
Yeah, that's a great question and a debate that goes on, including in the White House and in all these agencies. And it reminds me a little bit of the drug war. I think we have learned in the drug war that interdiction, stopping a lot of drugs at the border, and even bumping off or arresting kingpins seems not to ever quite reach the goal that you set for yourself, because obviously it's an economic thing, and you bump off one kingpin, there's somebody to step up, or 6 people to step up and take his place. And I don't think terrorism is quite the same way. From the people who are independent and study al-Qaeda, I think they would say that al-Qaeda has really been decimated in its core area in Pakistan. Obviously bin Laden was taken out, but a whole bunch of sort of top lieutenants were taken out. And it's not only the fact that they're bumping these guys off, it's the fact that they have to worry about this all the time. They can't communicate very easily, or they'll draw attention to themselves and get hit. They also don't trust one another, because there's a lot of worry. As you may have read, may remember reading, there was a second underwear bomber dispatched by the al-Qaeda branch in Yemen. And it turned out that guy was a plant. He was actually being run by British, Saudi, and U.S. intelligence, and he'd infiltrated the group and volunteered to bomb an airliner, and they gave him the underwear bomb, and he left and went back to his intelligence agency. So they have to. So it sows a lot of dissension and suspicion. So it does. It has had a very powerful effect on dampening that group in Pakistan. But then you have to balance that against. The drones are a bit of a cause in Pakistan. They're extremely unpopular. They're considered to be a violation of sovereignty. Rightly or wrongly, they're accused of killing a lot of children, a lot of women. And so how many young men, impressionable men, are joining this jihadi cause because of the drones? And that's an argument that's still going on. And a guy told us back when we did that article in May, that one of the things they talk about is on this kill list. Say there are 20 people on the kill list. Say you bump off number 3. Do you then just add a number 20? And where does this process end? Does it ever end? So that's sort of what's going on now, and it's hotly debated. I think probably the consensus view is that it has weakened, has really devastated al-Qaeda in its core in Pakistan, but it has, but it has also sort of fired up branches of al-Qaeda or allies of al-Qaeda in Yemen, in Somalia, in Iraq, and other places. And so, what the balance is very hard to say, and it's partly because this is brand new. It's never happened before. We've never done this before. No one's ever done it before. So, kind of ask the historians in 100 years how this all worked out.
I think we're winding down now, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you feel like taking it, to talk a little bit about the other matter you hinted at the beginning of your remarks, which is the incredible as a transfer to the more relaxed setting of our reception. How is it that we suddenly seem to be seeing so much less self-discipline in our military people?
Well, it's funny that you should put it that way. I don't know this to be a fact, but Alan Dulles, the CIA director for many years back around the time of, when we were trying to bump off Castro, in the early 60s, late 50s, he is said to have been an incredible womanizer who ran through dozens and dozens and dozens of mistresses. And so maybe it's not indiscipline, but a change of our standards and a change of what's sort of legitimate for news that's going on here. But you do have to wonder, first is David Petraeus, stepping down at CIA at a time when the CIA is up to its ears in a bunch of crises, very important crises. Not only the deaths of those Americans in Benghazi, in basically a CIA base, but the Syrian civil war. What are we going to do about that? There's just the Iranian nuclear program. The CIA is in the middle of that. Is Israel going to strike? What are we going to do? There's so much going on. So to lose a CIA director midstream like this, and one who by most accounts was doing a pretty good job, is obviously a price to pay. And then this morning we wake up to the news that the commander in Afghanistan is now under scrutiny for supposedly inappropriate emails. You do wonder when this FBI investigation, which began, I would remind you, as essentially, as it turns out, a sort of spat between two women who are both interested in Petraeus, and one sent the other some nasty anonymous emails. That's how we got started down this road. And you do wonder, by the time they finish this FBI investigation, will there be any generals left in the military? Will there be anyone to run these intelligence agencies?
Thank you very much, Mr. Shane, for your remarks.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for the great questions.